Hello and welcome to the Vulgar Eclectic. Hope you're doing well, and thank you for visiting my channel. Today I'd like to talk about a book I finished reading recently. After I read it, I wrote a short reaction, and I'll start by reading that, and then just expand on some of my thoughts about the book. I just finished reading Confessions of an English Opium-Eater, published originally in 1821 by Thomas De Quincey. This is a delightful little autobiographical book. A good chunk of it is a memoir of De Quincey's youth and includes an interesting description of his time living on the streets of London as a runaway. The remaining segments of the book deal more directly with his use of opium and subsequent descent into debilitating addiction. Some of the passages concerning his dreams and nightmares are particularly vivid. The text is peppered with Latin and Greek and frequent allusions to art and literature. The reader encounters interesting bits of history and glimpses of English society at the end of the Georgian era. This particular joy can be expanded by doing some research on the side and following the footnote breadcrumbs. And now, dear reader, we have run through all the 10 categories of my condition, as it stood about 1816 to 17, up to the middle of which latter year I judge myself to have been a happy man. And the elements of that happiness I have endeavored to place before you in the above sketch of the interior of a scholar's library in a cottage among the mountains on a stormy winter evening. Thomas De Quincey. All right, now I will just talk a bit about some of my further thoughts on the book. As you can probably tell from my introductory thoughts, this was a book I had a great time reading. As I mentioned, the little bits of art and literature referenced by De Quincey are great fun to explore. One such artist I was unfamiliar with is the Swiss painter Henri Fuseli. He was born a little before De Quincey and was a popular romantic painter. One painting of his, titled The Nightmare, is particularly apropos in the context of the Confessions. This oil painting is terrifying. It depicts a macabre incubus seated on the stomach of a prone, sleeping woman who is draped suggestively on a bed or divan. A haunting black horse stares out from the background with bulging eyes. The incubus casts a dark shadow upon red curtains behind the bed. The woman, assumingly asleep, appears as if she could be lifeless, sprawled as she is upon her back, with her neck exposed and vulnerable. Viewing this painting online, I could not help but be struck by the similarity with the following passage from De Quincey when he describes the immense torpor brought on by later stages of opium addiction. He lies under the weight of incubus and nightmare. In parts of the book, De Quincey can't help but paint a rather rosy picture of the charms of opium. Even the dreams he loudly laments sound enticing, surreal, and evocative, almost like Lovecraftian adventures among weird cities. I was reminded of a favorite line of poetry by Tennyson. Like that strange song I heard Apollo sing, while Ilion like a mist rose into towers. So this all-consuming inertia, both physical and mental, that he is powerless to resist, becomes an extremely compelling antithesis, a sharp contrast to the enveloping warmth described elsewhere. This is a significant aspect of his memoir, and I think it's worth hearing that quote in its larger context. I have thus described and illustrated my intellectual torpor, in terms that apply more or less to every part of the 4 years during which I was under the Circean spells of opium. But for misery and suffering I might, indeed, be said to have existed in a dormant state. I seldom could prevail on myself to write a letter. An answer of a few words to any that I received was the utmost that I could accomplish, and often that not until the letter had laid weeks or even months on my writing table. Without the aid of M, all records of bills paid, or to be paid, must have perished, and my whole domestic economy, whatever became of political economy, must have gone into irretrievable confusion. I shall not afterwards allude to this part of the case. It is one, however, which the opium-eater will find, in the end, as oppressive and tormenting as any other, from the sense of incapacity and feebleness, from the direct embarrassments incident to the neglect or procrastination of each day's appropriate duties, and from the remorse which must often exasperate the stings of these evils to a reflective and conscientious mind. The opium-eater loses none of his moral sensibilities or aspirations. He wishes and longs as earnestly as ever to realize what he believes possible and feels to be exacted by duty, but his intellectual apprehension of what is possible infinitely outruns his power, not of execution only, but even of power to attempt. He lies under the weight of incubus and nightmare. He lies in sight of all that he would fain perform, just as a man forcibly confined to his bed by the mortal languor of a relaxing disease, who is compelled to witness injury or outrage offered to some object of his tenderest love. He curses the spells which chain him down from motion. He would lay down his life if he might but get up and walk, but he is powerless as an infant, and cannot even attempt to rise. In addition to his discussion of opium use, addiction, and his overpowering dreams and nightmares, a significant portion of the book covers his youth, particularly the time he spent living as a runaway on the English road and in the streets of London. This part of the book includes some very touching scenes. He befriends a young girl, an urchin who lives in a semi-abandoned mansion. De Quincey assumes an avuncular role, and I was reminded of the movie City of Lost Children, with De Quincey as Ron Perlman's character named One, or the Scarecrow wandering a London Oz. I'm going to read another fairly long passage regarding this relationship. But I found, on taking possession of my new quarters, that the house already contained one single inmate, a poor, friendless child, apparently 10 years old, but she seemed hunger-bitten, and sufferings of that sort often make children look older than they are. From this forlorn child I learned that she had slept and lived there alone for some time before I came, and great joy the poor creature expressed when she found that I was in future to be her companion through the hours of darkness. The house was large, and from the want of furniture, the noise of the rats made a prodigious echoing on the spacious staircase and hall, and amidst the real fleshy ills of cold and, I fear, hunger, the forsaken child had found leisure to suffer still more, it appeared, from the self-created one of ghosts. I promised her protection against all ghosts whatsoever, but alas, I could offer her no other assistance. We lay upon the floor with a bundle of cursed law papers for a pillow, but with no other covering than a sort of large horseman's cloak. Afterwards, however, we discovered in a garret an old sofa cover, a small piece of rug, and some fragments of other articles, which added a little to our warmth. The poor child crept close to me for warmth, and for security against her ghostly enemies. When I was not more than usually ill, I took her into my arms, so that in general she was tolerably warm, and often slept when I could not. For during the last 2 months of my sufferings, I slept much in daytime, and was apt to fall into transient dozings at all hours. Another equally poignant relationship De Quincey relates from this period of his youthful vagabondage concerns a platonic friendship he develops with a prostitute named Anne. I will spare you another long excerpt, but suffice to say he makes clear how important this relationship was to him at the time, and how deeply saddened he is for the rest of his life by not being able to find her again. This moving and humane testament to the importance of human connection was a powerful part of reading the book. I won't here get into detail about his description of the ever more consuming dreams that overtake him during the depths of his addiction, other than to say it is while he is trying to describe these dreams that he references another artist I enjoyed researching and learning about on the side. This artist is the Italian Giovanni Battista Piranesi. In particular, De Quincey writes about a series of 16 etchings done by Piranesi, usually translated as imaginary prisons. Piranesi began this series of elaborate etchings in 1745, and they are all intricate, sometimes surreal, architectural fantasies. De Quincey mentions these while he is trying to explain his fantastical dreams that are brought on by his opium addiction. He writes with particular beauty and sublimity during these descriptions, and they are a pleasure to read. In fact, the prose is one of the really enjoyable aspects of this book. When I read, I usually keep a list of words I encounter that make a certain impression upon me. Perhaps they are words I'm unfamiliar with and had to look up in a dictionary, or perhaps they are simply words I'm unaccustomed with seeing, and possibly for this reason impart a particularly pleasant reaction. I think I'll make an additional short video about some of those words and phrases. I'll keep it separate, though, to try to keep this one a little shorter. If you have any thoughts, reflections, questions, or criticisms concerning these thoughts about the Confessions of an English Opium-Eater, please share them below. I'm eager to hear what you think, and I imagine others are as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. Be well and happy reading.